Yes, thank you so much. Can you see my slides? Yes, yeah, sorry, I haven't been on Teams for a while. Thank you both for organizing. I think it's a fantastic format to exchange about published papers as well, because I have exactly the same impression. There's so much work out there, and it's hard to catch up. And I think it's a good opportunity to, yeah, just take the time to listen to work and to see how people present it and what they emphasize and so on. So what I'm presenting is joint work with Silja Heusermann and Michael Pinguera, and a paper published in ESR. We are interested under what conditions citizens support future-oriented welfare reforms. And so the starting point that I think all of you are familiar with is that welfare states are challenged for several reasons. We have all this technological change going on, globalization, deindustrialization, new social risks arising. So somehow welfare states need to change to stay up to date to today's society. And there's a lot of talk whether social investment should be the leading paradigm of welfare states today. So a policy that is oriented towards skills and kind of making a new modern welfare state. At the same time, it's hard to do this because we already have lots of welfare established. So we have all these path dependencies, we have fiscal austerity, we have public debt levels. And so everything that policymakers do somehow has trade-offs. Either you need to increase taxation or cut something back or so. And so it's really hard to do. And there's a discussion among policymakers, but also in political science and sociology and other fields, on how much actually the welfare state can still be reformed. And there are a couple of examples. Here are two on the slides, one in Switzerland where they planned a massive pension reform. It was a super long process and then it failed. And another one that we have a book on, that there were a couple of education reforms that really many people agreed on, and still then it was watered down or kind of opposed because of some public opinion in some parts. And so we try to understand generally in this paper under what conditions citizens are willing to accept any type of reforms, and especially these future-oriented reforms that usually are very uncertain, so you don't know the outcomes, and there are certain risks involved. Often you have these time and consistency problems, that the benefits are in the future and the costs are today. And I think social investment is one example. Climate obviously is another, and there are really many other where this is the case as well. And so what we want to do in this paper is first offer a systematic test, if you like, of existing theories that we already have on the demand side and the supply side, and then introduce a new argument showing we also believe that second dimension politics is at play here. So let me show you this quickly. What do we know already? Obviously, we're not the first to study welfare state support. Everyone in this group is. So there are a couple of supply side arguments. We know that support is different in different policy areas. Pension usually is very famous, unemployment benefits not so much. We know that there are differences depending on the distributive profile, whether a policy is inclusive or targeted and so on, so also related to the paradox of redistribution. We know that time matters, so usually people accept reforms with a short-term horizon more than something when you tell them this is going to work in 50 years. And the costs matter, so the higher the costs, usually the lower reform support. But as far as I know, basically no paper has studied all of these things at the same time. And at the same time, we have a couple of demand-side explanations, obviously self-interest, so all the rational choice framework, obviously ideologies and other attitudes. So then you get into this whole thing, should we explain attitudes with attitudes, as you know, but at least I think it's interesting to look at the patterns of attitudes and behavior. So we try to offer a systematic test of basically all of these at once, and then introduce a new argument showing that especially second dimension politics, so whether you are green, alternative libertarian, or whether you are traditionalist, authoritarian, nationalistic, that this is increasingly relevant. And we know that this dimension is important. We know it matters for party politics. We know it matters for a range of things, but it hasn't been connected so much to welfare state reform yet. On the slide here, it's very brief. In the paper, it's discussed a bit more what we already know. But we try to push the argument that the first dimension, whether you are in favor of the state or the market, shapes your preferences on the size of the welfare state, whether you want a big state or a small one. And your second dimension preference shapes whether you like a certain type of welfare state, a more social investment oriented one or a more social compensatory oriented one. And so we argue that people that are more on the GAL side, green alternative libertarian, that we in the paper also call universalists, that they like social investments for several reasons, because of this belief in upward mobility, because of the progressive family model that it pushes with a dual work, dual care model. And on the other hand, the traditionalists, they are also called the particularisms, basically, and they focus on because of deservingness on pensions, to prefer compensatory spending. And I know that I'm being very brief here for reasons of time, so there's more in the paper. What we do in terms of research design is we have two samples that we are working with. One is Celia Häusermann's ERC project that was a public opinion survey in 8 Western European countries. And the second one is the Outness survey, that's the election study of Austria. And we use this one because it's a massive sample, so 3,000 respondents, which allows us to do a lot in terms of experimental evidence. The dependent variables are basically support to these trade-off scenarios or experimental scenarios. So in the welfare priorities, it reads, imagine the so-and-so country, government were planning a large policy reform. The reform would take so and so long to be implemented and would cost 5 billion. Would you support such a reform? And then there's a randomization, whether it's education policy or pension policy, and a randomization, whether it's 2 years or 15 years. And then the Outness survey, because it's so large, we can do even more. So we basically have 18 splits at the same time. So it's a bit like a conjoint, basically, already. We have education versus pension. We have difference on the reform effect, whether it improves quality or makes it more inclusive. We have different time horizons and different costs. And I know these costs are not realistic. So everyone who knows a bit about public finance knows the numbers should be much larger, but we believe that people have no idea about this. There's also lots of work showing people have no idea about these numbers. So this is just showing them some random numbers, and then we see what happens. And let me show you some of the results. So here's basically the WP is the Welfare Priority Survey, and then Outness is Austria. And what you basically see, first of all, is that in general, expansion is much more supported than retrenchment. I didn't show you the question frame, but we also have a question on retrenchment. And there you see that the support levels are much lower. And then we do see basically there's higher support for pension reform than for education reform. Both are extremely popular. Both are extremely, both are extremely popular, but pension even more. Time matters to a certain degree, so there's more support for short-term reforms than for long-term reforms. So there is this fear of the long term, and these things basically get flipped around in the retrenchment scenario. And finally, we show that it matters what exactly the policy does in terms of redistribution. So for expansion, it doesn't really matter. But for retrenchment, we see that people are more willing to retrench targeted policies than they are willing to accept retrenchment of inclusive policies. Normatively speaking, that's a bad sign because it means people are happy to increase inequality. I'll skip over lots of other results now and show you my final plot. This is basically on the left side here, the standard left-right dimension, where we see that the more people are on the left, so the more they are in favor of the state, the more they are in favor of any type of social policy. And on the right, you have the second dimension policies, second dimension issues, and there you really see this X. So people that are on the GAL side, so that are in favor of universalism, they love social investment. And this entirely flips around for people on the TAN side, which we take as quite strong evidence, even if not causal in the strictest sense, that there's support for the second dimension politics argument. So summarizing, we study under what conditions people support any type of reforms and show supply side matters, demand side matters, And an additional demand side factor is people's second dimension politics preference. And we show generally there's high support, but it matters what type of reform you give to people. I could spell out the relevance more, but maybe just leave the slides on and stop talking. Thanks again, and I look forward to questions. I don't know how the format exactly works, but you let me know.
Oh, my internet connection is not great. Yeah, am I back? Yes. Or not? Yes. Okay, good. So are there any questions? Maybe you can raise your digital hand with for that. Or phrases or yes, I see
Green. I don't. Is it me who should now ask? Or okay. Sorry. Hi everybody. Hi Julian. Thank you. Super interesting. I think I have read it, but I don't remember. So can you just remind me regarding the very interesting ideological X what we received, whether you controlled it for the background as well, this second dimension ideological effect?
What do you mean by background?
I mean, to what extent those ones who are liberal in the second dimension are also higher educated and then with high income, so on and so forth? Yeah.
Yes, we do that. So we try different things, but the standard stories are basically controlled. So if I go back here, no, sorry, I have it on the methods. I don't have, sorry, I would need to show you, but the standard things are in. So age, gender, education, income. I think we also tried occupation, because of course these things are nested, right? So we know that they predict ideological preferences. So it's kind of a hard test already.
Yeah, okay. Very interesting. Thank you.
Gonzalo.
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. I think it's because it went very fast, but can you elaborate a bit more on the second dimension politics argument, because I didn't quite catch it.
Yes, sorry, and I really had to rush there. So we know that the ideological space is at least two-dimensional, right? So there's a first dimension between the state and the market. Some people are hardcore liberalists and some are communists, going to the extreme. And we also know there's a second dimension, that some are more universalists, more in favor of greening, and so on. And we try to understand here to what extent the second dimension positions shape your social policy preferences as well. So if you think about concrete cases, maybe it's even easier. Let's take the German recent elections. So we saw that the party landscape has shifted a lot from competition of the Social Democrats versus the Christian Democrats to competition from the Greens versus the AfD. And I'm wondering then, to what extent this different type of competition now affects what's happening to the welfare state, because both the Greens and the AfD are actually in favor of the welfare state, but imagine completely different types of welfare states. One is much more inclusive, and the other one is much more welfare chauvinistic, as several in the room you know very well. And so we were wondering in particular what this matters for these long-term preferences. And then try to argue that people who are universalists, for several reasons, are more in line with the social investment model and this future orientation. And there are a couple of mechanisms that one could explore. We can't really delve into that in the paper because we didn't design the survey to delve into the mechanisms. But I think it would be fantastic to do that in future work as well.
Yeah. Super interesting. And then one final question for Anna.
Yes, thank you. Super interesting work. I had a quick question, because you now looked at education and pension reform. And you already mentioned that, for example, unemployment reform is a lot less popular, or unemployment benefits are a lot less popular under the general public. Do you think the results would be different for unemployment reform?
Yes and no. So we thought a lot about the policy fields. I think in an ideal world, we would have had 10 different types of policy fields to make sure we can kind of model all of those at once. But that was harder to do because of the questionnaire that we designed. So we picked the two examples that are the clearest types of social investment and clearest types of social compensation, while at the same time both are extremely popular. Because I think it doesn't make sense to compare a super popular education policy to a very unpopular, I don't know, unemployment benefit or so. So we try to find both or two that are really popular and both have long-term consequences. So pensions, of course, also are very long-term oriented. So, but I would expect definitely that the patterns are somewhat different for unemployment benefits. So the support levels would be much lower, and therefore also the distribution already is different. The age support is different, gender support is different, and given that we know that these affect also where people stand on the second dimension, I could very well imagine that we would also find interesting results for that, but I really would have to speculate. So I don't know.
Super interesting. Thank
Interesting for future research. Thanks so much, Julian. We have to move on, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, both. I think would be nice to have more time to discuss this paper, but we're also curious to the next. Gonzalo, may I invite you to share your screen?
Yes, of course.
And in the meantime, my internet connection is not that great, so if I'm frozen in the screen, then please be self-sufficient. But I trust you will be. Okay. Yeah,
Okay,
I will just signal 2 minutes, and yeah.
All right. You're all
You can
seeing
go
the
ahead.
screen already, right? You're seeing the slides. Yes. Okay. Yeah. So first of all, thank you very much for organizing the session and also for inviting me to participate. So my name is Gonzalo Arevalo Iglesias. I'm a last year doctoral candidate at the University of Bremen, and yeah, I'm gonna be giving a short pitch of this paper titled Intergenerational Cohabitation and Welfare Attitudes Among European Young Adults. This was the first paper that I wrote for my dissertation, and it has now recently been published in the Journal of European Social Policy. So intergenerational cohabitation is a quite prevalent phenomenon in Europe. Half of the individuals aged between 18 and 34 years old in the European Union still live with their parents, and it is generally understood that cohabitation primarily acts as a mechanism of protection against the risks that are associated with home living, mainly labor market risks, and of course, derived of this financial risk, insufficient income, and difficulty to face rising housing costs. And because these risks can alternatively be covered by social benefits and policies instead of by the family, in this paper, I explore whether the welfare attitudes of those young adults in Europe differ depending on whether they receive financial support through intergenerational cohabitation or they don't. In other words, I see whether living with parents is associated with changes in welfare attitudes. And I test two parallel mechanisms. So on the one hand, I look into a normative mechanism. So as you can see in the map, cohabitation is unequally distributed across countries in Europe. The general understanding is that there is a south-north gradient of cohabitation. We can see how Mediterranean countries and also Eastern European countries had much higher rates of cohabitation than continental and particularly Northern Europe. And this is, of course, explained by labor market conditions and by policy availability, but it is also strongly associated with social norms and the degree to which living with parents constitutes a normative arrangement. And in this sense, it has been proposed in the literature that in those societies where living with parents is not a normative arrangement, cohabitation might lead to feelings of frustration, feelings of failure, and therefore increased incentives to demand social policy, public welfare that enables emancipation. So in this sense, I hypothesize that there is a positive association between living with parents and demand for public welfare. but I expect to see this association mainly in those countries where living with parents is not normative. And then parallelly, I test a self-interest mechanism, and really this self-interest argument is like the origin of the paper, because we know that labor market risk does increase demand for public welfare. And as I said a moment ago, cohabitation and social policy constitute, to some extent at least, alternative forms of protection against these labor market risks. And therefore, I expect, or I hypothesize, that cohabitation might reduce the incentives that connect these labor market risks with attitudes. In other words, when young people face unemployment or atypical employment, living with parents might moderate the association between this labor market status and their attitudes. So this was tested with data from the European Social Survey, the 2016 model on welfare attitudes. I subsampled those individuals aged between 18 and 39 in that wave for 16 European countries, and then looked into attitudes towards two different types of policies. On the one hand, attitudes towards public unemployment support, which is not a specific policy, but what the item really asks is to what extent the respondents agree that the government should provide a decent standard of living for unemployed people. And then second, attitudes towards implementation of basic income schemes that could also offer potential relief for young people who face labor market risk. These are not combined, but what I did was fitting different models for each type of preference. Then to measure the main independent variables, cohabitation is simply a DAME indicator, indicating whether the respondent lives with at least one parent. Then for labor market status, I used a categorical variable, so I divided respondents between securely employed, atypically employed, and unemployed, and also have an extra category for education. Here, there was a bit of back and forth about using a numeric indicator of labor market risk, but I'm happy to justify my decision later. And finally, as a proxy for the extent to which cohabitation is a normative arrangement in each country, I used a proxy. The proxy was the country level cohabitation rate, because I really didn't have information on, even aggregated information on the normativity of cohabitation itself. Then I fit a number of different models for robustness, but the ones that are reported in the article and that I will report now are simply ordinal logistic random intercept models. So coming to the results, first thing is that in line with previous theory, we see that labor market risk does increase demand for both types of policies. So both respondents who are atypically employed or unemployed are significantly more supportive of this unemployment support and of the implementation of basic income schemes. And then to test the self-interest argument, to test whether living with parents moderate this effect, I introduced an interaction with the cohabitation variable, and we see that indeed there is a negative significant interaction effect. However, it differs depending on the type of policy. So for the basic income variable, it is very clear that living with parents moderates the effect of being atypically employed or unemployed. It does not work as well for the unemployment support variable. And here, the explanation that I find is that young adults who live with their parents because they are unemployed are very unlikely to have accumulated any contributions. And if respondents are associating unemployment support, the government helping the unemployed with contributory benefits, then they actually don't really have incentives to support these policies in order to emancipate, because they will not benefit from them. And in line with this, we see that there is a negative interaction effect for the atypically employed who have in turn accumulated contributions. Then we move on to the normative argument and first look into whether living with parents directly affects attitudes. Again, it only works for attitudes towards basic income, but here we see a clear positive effect. And we add a cross-level interaction with the country-level cohabitation rate. And indeed, the interaction is negative. This means that in countries where cohabitation is quite extended, where we have high rates and therefore could argue that living with parents is normative. There is no effect. The effect works only when cohabitation rates are low. Moving to the conclusions, the main contribution of the paper is showing that intergenerational cohabitation does indeed play a role in the formation of welfare attitudes, but I would like to take it a bit further and call the need for doing further research on the associations or the interactions, let's say, between family solidarity arrangements and welfare attitudes, given that social policy and family solidarity take complementary functions in the provision of welfare. As I just said, the results or the effects of cohabitation differ between policy types. We find two parallel mechanisms, a self-interest mechanism and a normative mechanism, and we also find significant cross-national differences. So we see that, yes, living with parents weakens the impact of labor market risks on attitudes, but this only works in familialistic countries where living with parents constitutes a normative arrangement. And in this sense, this might imply that family solidarity is holding back demand for public welfare in these familialistic societies. This is all from my side, so thank you very much for your attention. And yeah, here you have the quick link to the article. I look forward to your comments and suggestions.
Thank you so much. Again, very interesting and also a novel perspective on welfare editors. Very nice to see. Questions, please raise your hands or comments or, yeah, Julia was first, I think. Julia?
Me?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah,
okay.
You can
sorry.
go ahead. Sorry. Sorry.
My question is, did you consider in your models the level of affordability of housing in the countries and like the levels of homeownership and how young or old people get to homeownership in the country?
Yeah, that's a very good point. No, this is not included in the study. It is, however, a direction in which I would like to take this in the future. Because, yeah, I mean, obviously, the extent to which these young people are able to access housing also affects whether they stay with their parents or not. And I would also like to see whether this might have an impact on attitudes towards housing policies. But right now, it's not part of the study, no.
Okay, thank you so much. Julian, sorry, now I see the confusion, Julian.
Yeah, thanks also a lot. Sounds really interesting. I'll also take a look at the paper. Maybe you did already, but I thought you could also connect it a bit to Tom Chevalier's work on the varieties of youth welfare citizenship, so kind of how much the welfare states are connected to youth. But my question would be more, have you also looked into subnational variation? So I can imagine, for example, for Italy, that it matters a lot whether you live in the north or the south. For Germany, whether you lived in the west and the east. For, I don't know, whether you live in the city or not, which also connects to the question on the housing prices, I guess, as well.
Yeah, very good points. Thank you. Regarding Tom Chevalier's work, I considered it. It's not really part of the main argument of the paper right now, but it's definitely part of the inspiration. No, I mean at regional level, I imagine like a NATS level probably. It would be interesting. Maybe it suits itself more for perhaps a case study of one single country. The thing is that for the cohabitation rates, I don't think that I have the proper information at regional level for all the regions in all the countries considered. It might be that Eurostat has something on that, but yeah, I think it's a good idea. It adds also a lot of more complexity, and also the argument is sort of framed at a national level because it's thinking about national level policies. Although, yeah, of course, in countries that are very that have a lot of competence at the regional level, some of these unemployment benefits, etc., might be implemented by the regions. But it's something to think about. Thank you.
Thank you. I see no further questions at this point. So thank you so much for presenting this work and for the link. Julia, maybe you have another question? Yeah.
Yeah,
or
if
not?
nobody's asking, it's because
Yeah.
I'm working
sure,
with
sure.
this, and I did
I
like
know.
a paper on intergenerational transfers and how that affect welfare state and cohabitation. For me, it's very interesting. I was just wondering because when you take just the young, you get like very small sample sizes, and I was wondering like if you try to do like a country models also, or you just like pulled everybody in and controlled for a country fixed effects, or like did you get like just a small amount and that's impossible to work with, or you didn't have that problem?
So I mean, the sample size at country level, I don't know how small it is. It's not crazy small, but yeah, I guess it's a few hundred. I didn't do anything at country level other than, including the fixed effects, like the fixed the random intercept for countries in the model. What I did was models for welfare regimes. So grouping the countries, Mediterranean, Eastern, Scandinavian, and continental. And it actually, I didn't show it now because there wasn't really time for it in the presentation, but it goes perfectly in line with the main argument. So you can see how this moderation effects works well in the East and in the South, and it does not work in the other two groups.
Thank you. So more to read in the paper. I think then now we move on to Taisim Kim. You may
let me share my
share your screen.
screen.
And I will again wave at 2 minutes left, and yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I can't find my slideshow here.
So in the meantime, I would just want to stress that we're running a little bit out of time. I hope everybody can just take 5 more minutes at the end so that we can have proper discussions for each paper.
Okay, here we go. Can I
Yes,
start?
go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. This is my first time to present using Teams, so I'm not so familiar with Teams. Okay, so my presentation is based on my paper published in JSP last year. So now you're seeing the trends in South Korea's unemployment rate during the COVID-19 pandemic. As we all know, the COVID-19 pandemic caused the enormous economic risk not only to public health, but also to the economy. So, for example, in South Korea, in January 2021, South Korea unemployment rate hit the highest level since the 1997 financial crisis. So the question is whether the economic risk driven by the COVID-19 pandemic significantly increases the public support for social protection, and if so, how persistent did the impact remain? How persistent did the impact remain during the pandemic over the course of the pandemic? And finally, what factors differentiated the duration of the association between the pandemic-driven economic risk and public support for social protection? So to answer these questions, I used panel survey data collected in South Korea during the pandemic. So the wave one data was collected in 2020, a few months after the outbreak of the pandemic, and the wave 2 data was collected in 2021, a year after WTO's declaration of the pandemic. So the data reflects South Korea's perceptions during the pandemic, both in early and middle phases of the pandemic. I employed these 2 waves of the data in my paper, but just so you know, last year we collected additional data to figure out the longitudinal effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. So the independent variable of this study is economic risk induced by the COVID-19 pandemic. I particularly focused on unemployment experience. So when I use wave one data only, the unemployment experience indicates people's individual unemployment experience during the early phase of the pandemic. And when I use both wave one and wave two data, this early phase unemployment experience is denoted as unemployment experience T-1, indicating relatively more remote unemployment experience that occurred in the early phase of the pandemic. And the unemployment experience that occurred between wave one and wave two surveys, the unemployment experience indicates a relatively more proximate unemployment experience. So these two unemployment experiences reflect both remote and proximate unemployment experiences of South Koreans during the pandemic. And the dependent variables of the study are people's attitudes towards social protection measures. I particularly focused on three social protection measures: welfare benefits, redistribution, and universal basic income, so UBI. So because these dependent variables were measured on a 4-point scale, I used the ordinal logic models to analyze the data. And as potential factors that can differentiate the duration of the association between independent and dependent variables, I used the people's employment status change over the course of the pandemic and their age. And several control variables were also included in the analysis. So this figure shows the distributions of people's South Koreans' attitudes towards welfare benefits, redistribution, and UBI. And here are two takeaways from this figure. So first, the level of support for social protection measures among Koreans during the pandemic was quite high during the early and middle phases of the pandemic. And second, as you can see from the column C of the figure, more than 1/3 of respondents changed their attitudes between wave one and wave two. So what is the association between economic risk driven by the COVID-19 pandemic and these individual attitudes toward the social protection measures? So this figure shows the results from wave one data. And as you can see, individuals who experienced unemployment during the early phase of the pandemic were more likely to support welfare benefits, redistribution, and UBI. So the result correspond to the arguments of existing studies that economic risk increase people's support for social protection. But the result from wave two data conveys some mixed evidence. So a more proximate unemployment experience that occurred between wave one and wave two still significantly increased the people's support for welfare benefits, redistribution, and UBI, but a relatively more remote unemployment experience reported in wave one was no longer positively associated with people's support for social protection measures. So therefore, we can say that the economic risk driven by the COVID-19 pandemic did significantly increase people's support for social protection measures, but the effect disappeared in about a year. So the effect was just short-lived. And the next question is what factors differentiated the duration of the association between economic risk driven by the pandemic and people's attitude toward social protection measures. So the first one is people's employment status change over the course of the pandemic. Now the figure shows the predicted probabilities of exhibiting the strongest support for welfare benefits, redistribution, and UBI. And the most interesting finding was found among the re-employed. So the re-employed who experienced proximate unemployment experience, which means that the re-employed who experienced the unemployment between wave 1 and wave 2 still were more supportive of those three social protection measures than those without such unemployment experience. But such effects disappeared for the re-employed who experienced the unemployed very early in the pandemic, very early in the pandemic. And in addition, those remaining unemployed after experiencing unemployment induced by the pandemic were more likely to support welfare benefits, redistribution, and UBI, regardless of the timing of unemployment. So now, from the result, we can say that once people got economically better off and the time spent under economic hardship became more distant, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic induced economic risk was no longer positively associated with people's support for social protection measures. And let's consider the effect of people's age. So again, this figure shows the predicted probabilities of So this figure shows the predicted probabilities of exhibiting the strongest support for welfare benefits, redistribution, and UBI. And as you can see from the figure, so the unemployment experience during the early phase of the pandemic still significantly increased the people's support for those three social protection measures, but only among young adults aged between 18 and 25. So, although the impact...
We're now at 10 minutes, I want to say, just so you can finish your story.
Okay, I'm almost there. Yeah, okay, sorry about that. So the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic was not so persistent, but as socialization theory suggests, the impact might be longer for younger generations. Okay, so let me conclude. So the conclusion. So the result of this study suggests that the impact of economic risk driven by the COVID-19 pandemic was too limited to spur strong public support for social protection, which is necessary for welfare expansion. Therefore, we can say that although existing studies heavily emphasize the role of economic risk, significant institutional changes in the welfare state might be hard to achieve by solely relying on the impact of economic risk. So let me stop here. Thank you for listening, and any questions are very welcome.
Thank you so much again. And I think very remarkable results. So that's also, I think, really adding to the field. Are there questions or suggestions, comments? Yes, Julian?
Yes, thanks a lot for the paper. I had a question that's maybe a bit unfair because it's going beyond your paper, but I'm wondering to what extent you think that the effects are specific to the Korean case. So, of course, in different welfare states, we would have different types of risks and also different types of COVID effects, right? So in some there will be much stronger, and some there will be weaker than in Korea. And so I'm wondering where you see your case kind of in this distribution of countries, if you like.
Okay, thank you for the question. So, I mean, that point was pointed out by reviewers in the review process, and I have added that point as limitations of my paper in the discussion section. I mean, so for example, there was no nationwide lockdown in South Korea, so reviewers were a little bit concerned about that specific context, especially compared to some Western countries, some Western countries, including European countries. But also, of course, compared to Western European countries, South Korea is an emerging welfare state, but it has been it's been under a kind of a consolidation process. So I think perhaps the effect might be stronger in European countries. I mean, the effect of COVID-19 on people's welfare attitudes. But if I find this kind of association, even in emerging welfare states like South Korea, perhaps I think this finding might be meaningful. Even considering kind of specific context of South Korea as an emerging welfare state.
All right. Thank you so much. I think given time, we are also now moving to the final presentation, but thank you so much for this work to read in the Journal of Social Policy, if I'm correct. Thijs Lindner in this case.
Yes, thank you. I'll try to set up the presentation.
So I hope everybody can stay a little bit longer to give Thijs the floor and 10 minutes as well. If you're ready, you can go ahead.
All right, can everybody see my screen correctly? Okay, great. Yeah, so thank you. I will try to keep it short. So yeah, I'm Thijs Lindner, postdoctoral researcher at the Department of Public Administration and Sociology at the Erasmus University in Rotterdam. My research focuses on public attitudes to welfare and other contentious political issues, and I do so using a non-traditional approach, cultural sociological approach, which I will mainly focus on in this presentation. The paper I will be presenting was co-authored by Stijn Danekind, Willem de Koster, and Jeroen van der Waal. The paper, which was entitled What Do Stances on Immigrants' Welfare Entitlement Mean? Evidence from a Correlational Class Analysis, was published last year in the British Journal of Sociology and applies a novel analytical approach to uncover the meanings attributed to a salient issue in our field, namely welfare chauvinism. So let's see if I can move the slides. Yeah, it works. This issue, yeah, of course, concerns whether migrants, immigrants should be considered eligible for welfare provisions, which is, of course, a pressing political issue, especially in the past years in the Netherlands. For example, the radical right-wing PVV in the Netherlands views it as an issue related to immigrants or immigration and ethnic minorities. And their recent electoral victory in the Netherlands suggests that welfare chauvinist policy support is primarily driven by the same notion. But we asked the question, can we simply assume that every citizen shares in this interpretation of the issue? The framing of the liberal right-wing party VVD suggests otherwise, as they stress a dual social security system for national citizens versus temporary labor migrants, emphasizing the issue of welfare chauvinism through economic considerations. And this shows that welfare chauvinism means different things to different political parties. But of course, then the question becomes, does it also hold different meanings for citizens? And to answer this question, we investigated what exactly citizens themselves mean when they indicate a stance on the issue. But first, a little bit of clarity about what meanings are exactly. So meanings are particular understandings that are attributed to an issue which is shared by a group of people. And it is moreover a cultural schema, a notion about what the issue under scrutiny entails and its significance in relation to other socio-political phenomena. And also meaning is relational. And this entails that the specific meaning that is attributed to an issue, such as to a survey item, can be inferred from how it relates to responses about other issues. However, a shared meaning does not imply or necessarily mean a shared stance. Citizens might disagree in the extent of support for an issue, but nevertheless share the same meaning attributed to the issue, as they agree on the relevant and fundamental points of reference for the issue. Meanings are typically uncovered using small and qualitative research, yet this often results in problems with generalizability and external validity. So, of course, data from population representative surveys provides a solution as these resolve the inference problems. However, the meaning that is attributed to a survey response is unclear, as it cannot be discerned at face value how people perceive of the issue to which they are responding. And traditional techniques like regression analysis cannot inductively reveal different meanings. More specifically, clustering techniques such as vector analysis highlight dimensionality, but assume that all dimensions are equally relevant for every group of citizens. And likewise, latent class analysis cannot uncover citizen-attributed meanings, as it requires predefining the number of classes, enforcing a more deductive approach. So common clustering methods fail to truly inductively capture diversity of meanings citizens attribute to such an issue. And so we needed a technique that detects relationships between survey responses and inductively uncovers unique response patterns. So we applied an innovative method to uncover various meanings citizens attribute to welfare. And to do so, we utilized a questionnaire administered to a representative sample of the Dutch population, including 2,138 participants from the widely used longitudinal internet studies in the social sciences in the Netherlands. To uncover unique meanings, we analyzed how participants' survey responses to the issue of welfare chauvinism correlated with their attitudes on other related issues. A highly simplified fictional example is that welfare chauvinism may for some responses only be associated with dislike of ethnic diversity, while for others it is solely linked to an aversion to economic redistribution. And so specifically, we used correlational class analysis to uncover the different meanings people attribute to their attitudes on welfare chauvinism. And the method allows to inductively detect unique clusters, in other words, belief systems, in survey data based on unique patterns in Pearson correlations between the same set of survey items. As such, each uncovered cluster reflects a distinct belief system. And when responses about the issue under scrutiny are linked to items on relevant other issues, distinct belief systems exhibit unique relationships between the issue of welfare chauvinism and related issues. And interpreting these attitudinal patterns within belief systems and differences across them highlights unique meanings attributed to the issue under scrutiny. And this interpretation is aided by analyzing the social basis of each belief system. So more specifically, we linked survey items about welfare chauvinism to questions about other beliefs that based on the literature are most relevant. And these are ethnocentrism, a dislike of ethnic others, laissez-faireism, a dislike of economic redistribution, social distrust, and religious orthodoxy, which is a strict view about the religious doctrine. And we also examined the social backgrounds of these distinct meanings based on income, education, media preferences, religious denomination, and political preference. So applying this correlational class analysis, we came up with the following figures. Or at least with 5 different meanings. We identified 5 different meanings that the Dutch attribute to welfare chauvinism. Each meaning includes both proponents and opponents of the issue. And the first figure shows on the upper half of the screen now first shows the uncovered belief systems or the meanings. And the second figure shows their distinct social basis. I will briefly go through them. So in the first meaning, conventional conservative versus conventional progressive, all the other political issues are linked to welfare chauvinism. Support for welfare chauvinism here aligns with support for laissez-faireism, ethnocentrism, social distrust, and religious orthodoxy. And the reverse holds for those who are opposed to the issue. And this conventional meaning of the issue is underscored because respondents here come from all segments of society, as they are both low and highly educated, neither overly rich nor poor, and have diverse political preferences. In the second meaning, economic exclusivism versus economic inclusivism, the issue is primarily associated with support for laissez-faireism and ethnocentrism, while other beliefs are less connected to it. As such, it is driven by economic considerations, and respondents in this belief system tend to be more educated, have higher incomes, and often vote for the economically liberal right-wing party. In a third meaning, labeled as distrust or trust of ethnic others, support for the issue is primarily associated with ethnocentrism and somewhat lesser with social distrust, and vice versa for those who are opposed to welfare chauvinism. The two other political issues, laissez-faireism and religious orthodoxy, are not at all related to the issue, and as such, the issue here concerns distrust or trust in ethnic others. However, these respondents are the least educated and have a preference for lowbrow media. Additionally, they have a marked preference for radical right-wing parties. In the fourth meeting, labeled as traditional communitarianism versus secular inclusivism, religious beliefs are strongly linked to the issue, while ethnocentrism plays a smaller role. In contrast, social distrust and laissez-faireism have little connection to the issue, and supporters of welfare chauvinism see it as a traditionalist issue. Benefits should be reserved to the culturally native religious community. Opponents of us adopt a secular and inclusivist view, advocating equal access to benefits regardless of the cultural background. Respondents in this group often identify with a religious community and favor religious parties, while opponents are typically secular and vote for left-wing parties, reinforcing the secular inclusivist stance. And then lastly, in the fifth meaning, the secular exclusivist versus religiously inspired compassion, religious beliefs again play a key role, but actually in reverse. So in this case, ethnocentrism and laissez-faireism are also related, though less strongly. And here support for welfare chauvinism is shaped by secular views, while opposition to it is rooted in religious beliefs. Unlike the previous meaning, opponents of welfare chauvinism tend to be religious, often Protestant, and vote for Christian left-wing parties, motivating religiously inspired compassion for immigrants. Conversely, those in support of welfare chauvinism here primarily identify as secular and vote for the radical right. So we find that the same stance on welfare chauvinism may be based on very different meanings attributed to it. And our findings show that citizens' own perception of the issue does not necessarily align with dominant media and political portrayals of the issue. For example, the dominant political portrayal concerns a conflict over aversion to ethnic minorities. And our research shows that there are far more and distinctly other interpretations of this issue. And we argue that it is important to take these, to take these meanings serious to understand how the issue is politically mobilized. I have a few other suggestions for additional research, but for the sake of time, I will keep it to that. Basically, in conclusion, our novel approach to uncover citizens' unique and various meanings has strong potential for users beyond this issue as well. So I would like to end on that note. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thijs. And I think indeed very interesting new method, or I'm not sure how new the method is, but a new application in welfare attitudes. So I think that's indeed, like you said, a nice inspiration maybe also for other types of meaning in welfare attitudes. So who may I give the floor for a question or a comment? Yes, Trinh first.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, very interesting. And sorry for my ignorance. I just wanted to ask about this method, this correlational class analysis. Yeah. So just, is it available in R or what software did you use for that?
Yes, core class in R. Yeah,
okay.
It is.
Yeah, okay. And again, sorry if I'm wrong, but I think you argued earlier when you started that you didn't use latent class analysis because you didn't want to predefine classes, But I think you do not have to in latent class analysis, or according to my experience, not necessarily you do not have to decide before the analysis how many classes and so on and so forth. However, you have to decide, yes, the dimensions to be included, so on and so forth. But what did you mean by why you excluded latent class analysis? Can you explain once again? Thank you.
because of the way you indeed need to approach and how to fill in the different components, classes, or dimensions that you want to uncover. And I want to completely inductively reveal that. So with this set, you do not have to predefine the amount of clusters, dimensions, belief systems, meanings. That's uncovered by the method itself. But I don't think we have enough time to go through all the methodological aspects. I actually gave another presentation about that a few weeks ago. But yeah, thanks for the question.
Interesting.
Good question.
Maybe
yeah.
Interesting for another WARN activity or welfare attitude network activity. Keep that in mind. Gonzalo.
Yeah, thank you very much, Thijs, for the super interesting presentation. I really liked the methodological approach. I was wondering if you looked into or found any significant differences in cluster composition in terms of socio-demographics. I mean, you showed some results, I think, for education and income, but I don't know if you find something for age, gender, and I think probably most importantly, migration background.
Yes. Very good question. We actually got a reviewer who asked the exact same question. Actually, in terms of age, gender, and migration backgrounds, those were the three we discussed in there as well. The differences are actually not that revealing, so they don't inform anything about the actual substance of the different belief systems, so the meanings. And that was on the one hand, you could say it's quite surprising, especially concerning the migration background of people. But actually, a lot of other research already kind of shows that welfare chauvinist attitude per se, of course, although aligning to a more progressive liberal trend. And in our case, we have a couple of those different meanings across these kind of dimensions that we show. So it's not only aligned with either progressive being progressive, more lenient towards anti-welfare chauvinist stances. And in that sense, you have people with either a or not with a migration background covered through all the different belief systems or meanings that we uncover. So in that sense, it does not really substantively tell anything meaningfully about what the meaning is about. And that also applies to age and gender as well. Yeah. But yeah, good question. Thanks.
Thank you. Maybe one final comment or question from the audience. If not, then thank you so much, Thijs, also for sharing this interesting work. And I think that's this was our first. So we end now with our first pitch or paper session. For the next one, maybe we have like a little bit more time, if that's like one of the things I learned from this first tryout. I hope you can join for the next session. We now have the final dates, the 23rd of June, I think, Thijs. I'm correct, yeah. So I hope you can all join then, and then maybe after that we can evaluate this concept. But I think that at least for me it was very interesting to see all these lights going out here as well. It's very interesting to see all these papers here. So this is a sign I have to leave, apparently. Thank you all. If there are comments or questions, please let us know by email. And I wish you all a very good day. And thanks a lot again to all the presenters and you participating in the discussion.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Goodbye.